Hi guys. Before the city you know ever slept under electric lights and endless traffic, there came a night when winter decided to take everything back. Imagine streets swallowed by white silence, clocks ticking, while the world outside simply stopped moving, and a city learning how small it truly was against the breath of nature. That is the quiet promise of tonight's story. If you're listening from the U.S. late at night, from Europe in the early morning hours, or from somewhere else in the world while the sky is just beginning to change colors, I'm glad you're here. Take a moment to like this story, subscribe for more slow, calming tales, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Then, as the noise of the day fades, settle in. Adjust your pillow or chair, let your breathing slow, and prepare to drift gently into a colder, quieter past. Tonight, we travel back to the winter of 1888, to the moment when New York City, bold, busy, and confident, was brought to a standstill by snow, wind, and relentless cold. Now, let the modern world slip away and return with me to the beginning of the storm. The morning began without warning. No dramatic thunder, no ominous darkness, just a strange, heavy stillness in the air, as though the city itself were holding its breath. The sky over New York City was a dull, endless gray, stretching low and close, pressing gently but firmly against rooftops and chimneys. Snowflakes began to fall in a hesitant way, soft and delicate, drifting down like feathers shaken from a distant pillow. At first no one worried. Winter snow was familiar, almost comforting. Horse-drawn carriages moved along cobblestone streets with steady patience, their wheels leaving dark tracks that quickly softened beneath fresh powder. Shopkeepers swept their doorsteps, humming quietly, while children paused on their way to school to watch the snow gather on their mittens. The city carried on, unaware that this gentle beginning was only a whisper of what was to come. As the hours passed, the snow thickened. Flakes grew larger, heavier, clinging to coats and hats, blurring the edges of buildings until the world felt slightly unreal. The wind began to stir, not sharp or angry yet, but persistent, threading its way through narrow streets and alleyways. It carried with it a chill that seeped slowly through wool and leather, settling deep into bones. Inside homes, coal fires crackled softly, casting warm, flickering light against walls. Outside, the city's familiar sounds began to dull. Hoofbeats softened. Voices seemed quieter, as if swallowed by the falling snow. Telegraph wires sagged under growing weight, and rooftops wore thicker, heavier caps of white. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, its tone muffled and far away, like a memory already fading. By afternoon, the cold sharpened. Breath rose in pale clouds, lingering longer in the air. The wind grew bolder, pushing snow sideways, then back again, erasing footprints almost as soon as they were made. People pulled scarves tighter, leaning forward as they walked, sensing, without fully understanding, that the day was turning against them, and still the storm was only gathering its strength. As evening crept closer, the storm began to speak more clearly. The wind, once a quiet companion, found its voice and raised it without mercy. It rushed down avenues and collided with brick walls, whistling sharply through iron railings and beneath door frames, as if searching for a way inside every home and heart. Snow no longer drifted. It surged, driven hard and fast, stinging exposed skin like countless icy needles. Gas lamps flickered uncertainly along the streets, their yellow glow haloed by swirling white. Each light seemed fragile now, standing alone against the vast movement of the storm. Shadows stretched and twisted across the snow-covered ground, shifting with every violent gust. Carriages slowed, horses lowering their heads, muscles straining as they pushed forward through rising drifts that pressed against their legs like deep water. Inside the city's buildings, people gathered closer to warmth. Families moved chairs nearer to stoves, listening to the sound of wind rattling shutters and knocking gently, insistently against windows. There was comfort in these small, enclosed spaces, shared warmth, shared silence, yet even here unease slipped in quietly. The cold pressed inward, sneaking through cracks, reminding everyone that walls were thin things against nature's will. Outside, the snow climbed higher, covering curbs, swallowing steps, smoothing the city's sharp edges into something soft and unfamiliar. Street signs vanished beneath white mounds. Familiar corners disappeared, transformed into blank, indistinguishable shapes. Those still attempting to travel found themselves disoriented, landmarks erased, directions lost in the spinning veil of snow. Night arrived early, heavy and absolute. The sky and the ground blended together until it was difficult to tell where one ended and the other began. The wind howled now, a long, mournful sound that echoed between buildings like a warning carried too late. Each gust felt stronger than the last, as though the storm were testing the city, measuring its strength. By the time most people retreated indoors, it was clear this was no ordinary winter night. The storm had settled in, unhurried and relentless, and the city, once loud and confident, was growing quieter with every passing hour, wrapped tightly in cold and shadow. By the deep hours of the night, the storm had settled into a steady, consuming rhythm. Snow no longer fell in moments. It fell in layers, building upon itself with quiet determination. Doorways vanished first, then windowsills, then entire ground floors seemed to sink into the white. The city's familiar shape softened and blurred, as if someone were gently erasing it with a careful hand. Inside the tenements and townhouses, sleep came lightly. People stirred beneath heavy blankets, listening to the constant rush outside, the wind's low roar, the faint thud of snow sliding from rooftops, the distant creak of wood bending under weight. The cold pressed closer, thinning the warmth of coal fires, cooling rooms inch by inch. Each breath felt sharper, even indoors, as though winter itself had found a way through the walls. Somewhere in the darkness, a carriage became trapped, its wheels buried beyond movement. The horse stood patiently, steam rising from its body, while the driver struggled against the wind, his lantern swinging wildly, casting brief arcs of light before being swallowed by snow again. Every effort felt slower, heavier, as if time itself had thickened along with the storm. The streets were nearly silent now. No laughter, no hurried footsteps, only the voice of the wind and the steady whisper of falling snow. Even the city's heartbeat, once constant and loud, had begun to fade. Telegraph lines drooped dangerously low, humming faintly before snapping one by one, cutting invisible connections that tied people together across distance. Yet within the stillness, there was an unexpected calm. Wrapped in layers of snow, the city seemed to rest, forced into a pause it had never allowed itself before. In this frozen quiet, worries softened. The world shrank to immediate needs: warmth, shelter, and the simple comfort of knowing someone else was nearby. Above it all, the storm continued, patient and unyielding, reshaping the night. By morning, nothing would look the same. But for now, the city slept uneasily beneath a vast, white silence. Morning arrived without light. The sky remained a solid, endless gray, offering no hint of sunrise or warmth. When people finally opened their doors, they were met not by streets but by walls of snow. Drifts stood chest-high in places, packed tight by wind, smooth and unbroken like frozen waves. The city had not merely been covered, it had been sealed. Doors refused to open fully, pressing back against snow that had claimed the night. Windows revealed only white, as though the world beyond had vanished completely. In some homes, residents climbed out through upper floors, carefully lowering themselves into narrow, icy corridors carved by neighbors doing the same. Each movement was slow and deliberate, breath fogging thickly in the bitter air. The cold had sharpened overnight, turning breath into crystals that sparkled briefly before fading. Fingers numbed within moments, even through gloves, and cheeks burned as if brushed by flame. The wind, though quieter now, carried a cutting edge that seemed to slice through layers of clothing without effort. Every sound felt amplified: the crunch of boots, the scrape of shovels, the distant call of a voice echoing strangely through snow-filled streets. Attempts to resume daily life quickly failed. Streetcars sat frozen in place, their tracks buried so deeply they might as well have never existed. Businesses remained closed, their signs hidden, their doors unreachable. Even the boldest commuters turned back, understanding at last that the city's usual rhythms had been broken. Yet among the hardship, small acts of kindness emerged. Neighbors shared shovels, took turns digging narrow paths, and called out to one another to make sure no one was trapped or alone. Windows opened briefly as food, blankets, or warm words were passed across the cold air. In these moments the city breathed again, quietly, carefully. The storm had taken control, but it had also drawn people closer, binding them together in shared stillness and resolve. The day stretched ahead, uncertain and heavy, as New York City faced the reality of a world that could not be hurried forward. As the hours passed, a strange quiet settled over the city. The wind softened, then finally fell still, leaving behind an absence so complete it felt almost unreal. Snow lay everywhere, untouched and endless, reflecting what little light filtered through the clouded sky. The storm had spoken all it needed to say, and now it waited. Without the wind, sounds carried differently. A single shovel striking ice echoed down entire blocks. Voices sounded distant and hollow, as though spoken inside a vast white room. The usual noise of the city, bells, wheels, crowds, was gone, replaced by a calm that felt both peaceful and unsettling. New York City seemed to be holding its breath, unsure how to begin again. Cold ruled everything. Pipes froze within walls, their silence broken only by sudden cracks as ice expanded inside them. Water became precious, heat uncertain. People moved carefully, conserving energy, wrapping themselves in layers, and patience alike. Fires were fed slowly, watched closely, every ember valued. Out in the streets, the scale of the storm became clearer. Snowbanks towered higher than door frames, stacked and sculpted by wind into sharp ridges and deep hollows. Familiar routes were erased, forcing people to invent new paths through narrow trenches carved by hand. Progress was measured not in distance, but in effort. Still, hope moved quietly among the drifts. Children, unable to resist wonder even in hardship, shaped the snow into walls and tunnels, their laughter briefly warming the air. Adults paused to watch, allowing themselves a moment of softness amid exhaustion. The city, though frozen, was not broken. Under the pale sky, people began the long work of recovery, slow, steady, and shared. Each cleared step, each offered hand, was a promise that movement would return, that the stillness would not last forever. Time changed its meaning after the blizzard. Hours no longer followed clocks, but the slow rhythm of effort, shovel after shovel, breath after breath. Morning blended into afternoon beneath the same pale sky, and night returned without ceremony, carrying the same cold it had brought before. The city learned patience, not by choice, but by necessity. Men and women formed quiet lines along buried sidewalks, passing snow back and away from doorways, carving narrow corridors that connected one home to the next. Gloves stiffened with ice, shoulders ached, yet no one rushed. Each movement was careful, deliberate, conserving warmth as much as strength. Steam rose from bodies like gentle ghosts, drifting upward and disappearing into the gray. Food was shared simply, a loaf broken in half, a pot of soup warmed again and again, offered to anyone who knocked. The scent of broth carried faintly through the cold air, comforting and grounding, a reminder that warmth could still exist. Conversations stayed soft, voices lowered by fatigue and respect for the quiet that had settled over everything. At night, lamps glowed behind frosted windows, small squares of gold against endless white. Inside, families gathered close, wrapped in layers, listening to stories told slowly to pass the time. The storm had taken speed from the world, leaving only these gentle moments, breathing, listening, waiting. Though exhaustion weighed heavy, there was a calm beneath it. The city was learning how to move again, not quickly, but together. Snow still ruled the streets, but beneath it, determination pressed steadily upward, ready to rise when the time was right. By the next morning, thin pathways began to thread through the city like careful stitches. They were narrow and uneven, just wide enough for one person at a time, bordered by snow walls that rose higher than shoulders in some places. Walking these paths required focus, one slow step after another, boots sinking slightly, then finding firm ground beneath. The cold lingered, but it felt different now, less sharp, more settled, as if winter had said its piece and was willing to wait. Breath still fogged the air, but people noticed it less. Their attention rested on balance, on forward motion, on the quiet satisfaction of reaching the end of a path and knowing it had not existed the day before. Messages traveled by voice and memory. Someone would lean out a window to call news down the trench, who had food, who needed coal, who hadn't been seen yet. Names passed gently from person to person, carried with care. Every reply brought relief, every answered call eased the tightness in the chest. Above the snow corridors, rooftops gleamed faintly, icicles hung like fragile glass, catching what little light there was. Occasionally, snow slid down in soft cascades, reminding everyone that the city was still settling, still adjusting under the storm's weight. In the quiet effort of walking, digging, and helping, people found a rhythm that soothed the mind. The world had become smaller, slower, and strangely peaceful. Each step forward felt like a promise, not of speed or ease, but of continuity. Life, though altered, was still moving. Even as the days edged forward, the cold refused to loosen its grip. It settled deep into stone and iron, into the very bones of the city, lingering long after the snow had stopped falling. Metal burned at the touch. Wooden doors groaned softly as they expanded and contracted, adjusting to the relentless chill. The city breathed slowly, carefully, as if afraid that too much movement might invite the cold to bite harder. Water became a quiet concern. Frozen pipes left sinks dry and silent, forcing people to melt snow over stoves, watching patiently as ice turned back into something useful. Each cup of water felt earned, valued. Fires were tended with near reverence, fed just enough to last, their glow a steady companion through long hours of waiting. Outside, the snow began to change. Its surface hardened under the cold, forming a thin crust that crackled underfoot. Sunlight, weak but present, glinted off countless crystals, turning the city into a field of muted sparkle. The beauty was undeniable, and people paused more often now, standing still in the trenches, just to look, to breathe, to feel something gentle amid the hardship. Fatigue lingered, heavy and quiet. Movements were slower, conversations shorter, yet there was no panic, only endurance. The storm had taught the city how to wait, and in that waiting, how to rest. Communication, once effortless, had become uncertain and fragile. With wires down and roots buried, news moved at the pace of footsteps and memory. A message might leave one block in the morning and arrive at the next, by afternoon, carried carefully in someone's mind, repeated softly to be sure it stayed true. In this slower world, words mattered more. People gathered at corners where paths crossed, exchanging updates like precious goods. Who had heat? Who needed help? Who had been seen waving from an upper window? Each piece of information was received with attention and gratitude, followed by a pause, a moment to let relief settle before moving on. There were losses, too, missed meetings, unanswered knocks, silence where a voice was expected. These moments carried weight, but they were held gently, balanced by steady resolve. When someone could not be reached, neighbors checked again, then again, refusing to let concern turn into despair. At night, the city grew especially quiet. Without the hum of connection, people listened more closely to the crackle of fire, to the wind brushing rooftops, to the slow, reassuring sounds of others nearby. In the absence of distant voices, closeness deepened. Presence became its own kind of message. Through snow and stillness, the city learned a softer way of speaking, one built on patience, care, and the steady belief that connection, though slowed, was never truly lost. A subtle change came with the next dawn, not warmth but light. The sky lifted just enough to reveal pale blue beneath thinning clouds, and the city noticed. Faces turned upward instinctively, eyes squinting against brightness they hadn't realized they missed. The light fell softly across the snow, smoothing shadows, easing edges, making the world feel a little less heavy. With clearer daylight, work became steadier. People could see where to dig, where to step, where the snow had packed into stubborn walls, and where it might give way. Shovels rose and fell in an unhurried rhythm, metal ringing faintly against ice. Each sound felt purposeful, guided by patience rather than urgency. Windows opened wider now, curtains were pulled back. The glow of lamps faded in the morning hours, replaced by daylight that crept gently into rooms. Inside, spirits lifted in small, quiet ways. A deeper breath, a softer expression, a sense that the worst had passed, even if the cold remained. Children traced patterns in the snow with gloved fingers. Adults paused mid-task to stretch aching backs and watch the light move across rooftops. No one spoke of returning to normal just yet. There was no rush. The city understood that recovery, like winter itself, moved on its own schedule. And so, under a brighter sky, New York City continued its careful awakening, one slow, deliberate moment at a time. As daylight lingered a little longer each day, the true weight of the blizzard became clearer, not just the snow piled high, but the way it had pressed itself into memory. Roofs sagged under heavy blankets of ice and white, and people moved cautiously below, listening for the soft groan of beams adjusting to the load. Every sound carried meaning now, each creak and crack carefully noted. The city smelled different. Coal smoke hung low and steady, mixed with the clean, sharp scent of snow that had been packed and reshaped by countless boots and shovels. The air felt dense, almost slow, as if even breathing had learned to take its time. With each inhale came cold. With each exhale, a cloud that drifted briefly before fading away. Inside homes, routines had changed. Meals were simpler, eaten quietly with hands wrapped around warm bowls for as long as possible. Stories were told again and again, not to pass time, but to remind everyone that continuity still existed, that life before the storm was real, and life after it would come. Outside, the snowbanks stood like monuments, marking how far the city had been pushed and how steadily it was pushing back. People paused often, resting against shovels, looking not just at what remained to be cleared, but at what had already been done. Progress was slow, but it was visible, and that was enough. A distant rumble broke the quiet one morning, low and unfamiliar. People paused mid-step, listening, uncertain at first whether the sound was real or imagined. Then it came again, metal against metal, slow and heavy. Somewhere beneath the snow, the city's long-stilled machinery was beginning to stir. Workers cleared tracks with careful determination, chipping away at ice that had fused itself to iron rails. Each strike sent a sharp echo through the cold air, followed by the softer collapse of loosened snow. Progress was measured in inches, not miles, yet every cleared section felt like a small victory shared by all who watched. When the first streetcar finally moved, it did so reluctantly, wheels groaning as if waking from deep sleep. People gathered along the trenches, faces calm but intent, witnessing a moment they would remember for years. The car crept forward slow and steady, carrying more than passengers. It carried proof that motion was possible again. No cheers broke the air. Instead, there was a collective exhale, a quiet release of tension. The city did not rush to follow. It allowed the movement to happen gently, carefully, respecting the fragile balance between effort and rest that the storm had taught. With movement returning in careful fragments, the city seemed to inhale for the first time in days. Not deeply, not all at once, but gently, testing the air. The streets remained narrow and white-walled, yet within them flowed a renewed sense of direction. People walked with slightly longer strides now, pausing less often, trusting their balance a little more with each step. The cold still lingered, but it no longer felt absolute. Sunlight found its way into places it hadn't reached since before the storm, onto brick walls, across frozen windows, along the tops of snowbanks that had begun to soften at their edges. Drips of meltwater appeared, quiet and rhythmic, tapping softly into the packed snow below like a slow, patient clock. Voices carried more easily now, conversations stretched beyond brief exchanges of need and reassurance, drifting into memories, observations, and quiet hopes. There was talk of schedules restarting, of letters finally arriving, of routines that would one day return, not exactly as they were, but changed in subtle, lasting ways. At night the city slept more soundly. Fires still glowed, blankets still piled high, but the tension had eased. The wind no longer pressed so hard against windows. The silence felt softer, less watchful. New York City, though still wrapped in winter, had remembered how to breathe again. As the snow slowly receded, it revealed a city subtly reshaped. Beneath the white there were scratches on stone steps, bent railings, and worn paths carved where none had existed before. These marks were not damage alone. They were records, quiet signatures left by effort and endurance. People noticed how their surroundings had changed. Corners once sharp were now rounded by ice. Familiar roots felt different underfoot, as though the ground itself remembered being buried. Even the air seemed altered, carrying a faint dampness as snow softened and sank back toward the earth. The city moved cautiously, aware that winter was not finished, only resting. Coats stayed close, fires were kept ready. Yet there was comfort in the knowledge that the worst had been faced together. The storm had tested strength, but it had also revealed a deep, steady resilience that had been there all along. In the evenings, stories of the blizzard began to form, told quietly without drama, shaped by reflection rather than fear. Each retelling smoothed the edges of memory, turning hardship into something shared and understood. With each passing day, the city settled into a gentler rhythm. The snow no longer dominated every thought, though it still lined the streets and rested in shaded corners, stubborn and slow to leave. People moved with a new awareness, stepping carefully, listening more closely, to the ground beneath them, to the air, to one another. There was a patience now that hadn't existed before. Tasks were taken one at a time. Plans were made with room for change. If something could not be done today, it would wait. The storm had shown how easily certainty could be taken away, and how calm acceptance could soften that loss. In the quiet hours, when work paused and lamps glowed low, reflections drifted in gently. People thought about what they had missed and what they had found, shared warmth, shared silence. The comfort of knowing that help might arrive not quickly, but surely. Outside, the city rested beneath a winter sky that felt less threatening now, more familiar. Snow reflected the moonlight in muted tones, and the air carried a stillness that invited rest rather than worry. The blizzard had passed, but its lessons remained, whispered softly in every careful step forward. One afternoon, a new sound drifted through the narrow paths, soft, irregular, and gentle. At first, it was barely noticed, blending with the quiet rhythms of the recovering city. Then people began to recognize it. Water. Snow melting at last, loosening its hold, turning slowly back into motion. Drops slid from rooftops in patient intervals, tapping against ice and stone. Somewhere, a thin stream found a path along a trench wall, tracing a shining line through packed white. The sound was calming, almost musical, a reminder that even the coldest stillness eventually gives way to change. The air felt heavier with moisture, carrying a faint scent of earth beneath snow that had hidden it for days. People paused more often now, not from exhaustion, but from noticing, listening to the drip, watching sunlight catch in tiny pools that formed and disappeared again. These small signs of thaw brought a quiet comfort, not excitement, just reassurance. Work continued, steady and unhurried. Shovels were lighter now, snow softer underfoot. Each cleared step felt less like resistance and more like cooperation, as if the city and winter had reached a careful agreement. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. The world moved at the pace it needed. As evening settled in, the sound of water faded with the cooling air, but the memory of it remained, soft, hopeful, and persistent, like a promise whispered rather than spoken aloud. Gradually, shapes once lost began to return. A corner of a sidewalk emerged here, the edge of a stoop there, each revelation small but grounding. People paused when they recognized these details, standing quietly as memory aligned with sight. The city felt less like an unknown landscape now, and more like itself again, though softened, humbled by what it had endured. Footsteps found older rhythms, where paths had been carved out of necessity. Familiar roots slowly reasserted themselves, a turn taken without thinking, a doorway reached by instinct. These moments brought comfort not through excitement, but through calm recognition, like meeting an old friend after a long silence. Snow still lingered in deep shadows, tucked against walls and under iron fences, but it no longer felt overwhelming. The cold remained, yet it had lost its sharp authority. People carried themselves differently now, less guarded, more at ease, trusting that the city would continue to open up, one quiet reveal at a time. As evening settled, lights reflected softly on wet stone and melting snow, creating gentle patterns that shifted with every step. The city moved slowly toward rest, wrapped in a sense of steady recovery, content to take the night as it came. Evenings began to change in subtle ways. The cold still arrived with dusk, but it no longer felt sudden or harsh. It settled gently, like a familiar weight, expected and understood. People lingered a little longer outside before retreating indoors, taking a few extra moments to watch the sky deepen from gray to blue, then to a quiet, starless dark. Inside homes, routines found their way back, not hurried, not exact, but comforting all the same. Kettles warmed slowly, lamps were lit earlier, their glow spreading calmly across walls that had seen long nights of worry. Conversations returned to ordinary things, plans for tomorrow, small observations, gentle laughter that felt almost surprising in its ease. The city sounded different now. Where once there had been only silence or wind, there were footsteps again, measured and unhurried. A distant cart moved carefully along a clearing street. Somewhere, a door closed with a solid, reassuring thud. These simple sounds carried a deep sense of peace, as though the city were reminding itself that it was still alive. As people settled into rest, sleep came more easily. Bodies were tired in a good way, minds quieter, thoughts slower. Outside, the remaining snow reflected the lamplight softly, holding the day's calm and offering it back to the night. There came a night when the city finally felt at rest, not silent in the way it had been during the storm, but settled, balanced between movement and stillness. The streets, though still edged with snow, lay open enough to breathe. Lamps cast steady pools of light that no longer trembled in the wind, and shadows stayed where they were meant to stay. People moved through the evening with quiet confidence. Doors opened and closed without resistance. Boots no longer sank deep with every step. The ground felt firm again, reliable beneath tired feet. Even the air seemed gentler, cool, but no longer demanding attention with every breath. Inside, sleep arrived naturally. Blankets were pulled close out of habit rather than fear, and the crackle of fires softened into a low, comforting murmur. Dreams came slowly, shaped by recent memory. Snow falling endlessly, hands helping hands, light returning in small, patient ways. Outside, the city held itself together, roofs dripping softly as meltwater froze again in the cooling night. Winter remained present, watchful but calm. And within that calm, New York City rested. not finished healing, not hurried to forget, but content to pause where it was, knowing morning would come. Morning returned with a quiet sense of order. Light slid gently along the streets, catching on damp stone and thin ribbons of ice that traced the edges of sidewalks. The city did not wake all at once. It stirred in stages, one window brightening, one door opening, one careful step taken into the cool air. There was a rhythm now, slow and reassuring. Shovels rested more often against walls, used only where stubborn patches remained. People greeted one another with soft nods, exchanging few words because none were needed. The work of surviving had eased into the work of living again. The cold still lingered, but it felt familiar, almost companionable. Breath rose and faded without sting. Hands moved more freely. Time, once thick and heavy, began to loosen, allowing moments to pass without being counted. As the morning settled in, the city carried on, not rushing, not forcing itself forward, just moving steadily, guided by patience and the quiet confidence that comes after enduring something together. As life found its pace again, the blizzard began to transform in people's minds. What had once been only cold and effort slowly became something shaped by memory and meaning. Stories formed naturally, told in low voices over meals or shared while walking side by side along clearing streets. Details settled into place: the height of the drifts, the sound of the wind, the way time seemed to pause. Each telling softened the hardship, smoothing it into something that could be held without weight. Fear gave way to reflection. Exhaustion turned into quiet pride. The city listened to itself. These shared memories wove a gentle thread between neighbors, connecting experiences across streets and blocks. Even those who had spoken little before found common ground now, bound by a moment they would never forget. In this way, the storm began to belong to the past, not as something to escape, but as something understood, and in understanding there was calm. There came a point when thoughts gently turned forward, not in bold plans or hurried promises, but in small considerations that floated in quietly. What tomorrow might need, what could be prepared, what lessons might be carried along. The city did not rush to forget the blizzard. It simply allowed space for what would come next. Snow thinned along the edges of streets, revealing dark pavement beneath, still wet and cold but solid. The sight brought a sense of grounding, like feeling firm earth after walking on ice for too long. People adjusted their steps naturally, bodies remembering balance, minds releasing tension they had been holding without realizing it. Inside homes, simple tasks returned to their places. Clothes dried, tools were cleaned and set aside. Fires burned lower, trusted now to last. These quiet acts stitched normality back into daily life, one careful motion at a time. The city felt thoughtful rather than triumphant. It moved forward with awareness, carrying the memory of stillness alongside the comfort of motion. Winter had spoken, and New York City had listened, ready now, not to challenge the cold, but to live with it more gently. The blizzard left behind more than snowbanks and memories. It reshaped how the city understood itself. There was a new awareness in the way people looked at the sky, at the wind moving between buildings, at the quiet power of weather that could pause even the busiest streets. Nature was no longer a backdrop. It was a presence, acknowledged and respected. This understanding showed in small ways. Supplies were stored more thoughtfully. Conversations about preparedness carried a calm seriousness. People noticed signs of coming cold sooner, listening closely to shifts in air and light. These changes were not driven by fear, but by wisdom earned through experience. The city felt older somehow, steadier. It had learned that strength was not always found in speed or noise, but in patience, cooperation, and the ability to rest when rest was required. In this gentler strength there was comfort. As the days continued, the blizzard settled into history, not forgotten, but folded neatly into the city's long memory, ready to be recalled when needed. By now, the city carried itself with a quiet confidence that had not been there before. Not pride, not triumph, just a steady assurance born from having endured and continued. People moved through their days with an ease that felt earned, their steps lighter, their pauses more intentional. The remaining snow no longer demanded attention. It rested along curbs and in shaded corners, slowly shrinking, slowly yielding. Meltwater traced familiar paths again, slipping into gutters, finding its way home. The city watched without hurry, content to let change unfold at its own pace. In conversations, there was an unspoken understanding. When eyes met, there was recognition. You were there too. No explanation was needed. The storm had created a shared language of experience, quiet but enduring, spoken through gestures and gentle smiles. Evenings felt especially calm. Lamps glowed warmly, streets reflected soft light, and the air carried a stillness that invited rest rather than vigilance. The city had learned it could survive stillness, silence, and cold, and that knowledge settled deep, like warmth held beneath layers. Time, which had once seemed thick and unmoving, began to loosen its hold. Days separated themselves more clearly now, morning distinct from afternoon, afternoon easing naturally into night. The city felt the return of gentle momentum, like a river finding its course again after being held by ice. Clocks were checked more often, not from urgency, but from familiarity. Schedules returned in softened forms, adjusted to what had been learned. People allowed extra moments between tasks, leaving room for the unexpected, remembering how quickly certainty could disappear. The cold lingered in the shadows, but it no longer defined every thought. Sunlight warmed brick and stone just enough to be noticed, and that was enough. The city moved forward without haste, trusting that flow would continue as long as it was not forced. In this renewed rhythm, there was peace, a calm acceptance of change, and a quiet confidence in continuity. Life resumed, not as it had been before, but as something slightly wiser, slower, and more aware. At some point, the blizzard stopped feeling immediate and began to feel distant, like a dream recalled upon waking. Its presence was still there, but softened. Edges blurred, intensity eased. Snow clung only in forgotten places now, thin and gray, retreating quietly, without ceremony. People spoke of the storm in the past tense, when it came, when the city stopped, when the cold ruled everything. The words were gentle, reflective, no longer weighted by urgency. Memory had done its quiet work, turning strain into story, hardship into understanding. The city itself seemed lighter, streets open wider. Movement felt natural again, unguarded. Even the air carried a different quality, still cool, still winter-born, but no longer heavy with demand. Breathing came easily, without thought, and so winter shifted its place in the mind. It was no longer something happening now, but something that had happened and been survived. The city carried that knowledge calmly, like a hand resting at its side, ready if needed, but content to remain still. Though the storm faded into memory, its lessons remained close. They showed up in quiet choices, in the way people prepared before winter deepened, in the attention given to small warnings, in the patience practiced when things slowed unexpectedly. These were not dramatic changes, but steady ones woven gently into daily life. The city listened more carefully now, to the weather, to one another, to the spaces between moments. It understood that strength did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it appeared as waiting, as sharing, as resting when rest was required. There was comfort in this awareness, a sense that the city had grown not harder, but wiser. It had learned how to bend without breaking, how to pause without fear. And in that learning there was lasting calm. As winter days continued to pass, the city moved forward quietly, carrying its lessons like a soft layer of warmth beneath the cold. Though the storm faded into memory, its lessons remained close. They showed up in quiet choices, in the way people prepared before winter deepened, in the attention given to small warnings, in the patience practiced when things slowed unexpectedly. These were not dramatic changes, but steady ones, woven gently into daily life. The city listened more carefully now, to the weather, to one another, to the spaces between moments. It understood that strength did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it appeared as waiting, as sharing, as resting when rest was required. There was comfort in this awareness, a sense that the city had grown not harder, but wiser. It had learned how to bend without breaking, how to pause without fear. And in that learning, there was lasting calm. As winter days continued to pass, the city moved forward quietly, carrying its lessons like a soft layer of warmth beneath the cold. A deep, steady calm settled over the city, the kind that arrives after something difficult has fully passed. It was felt in the way doors were left open a moment longer, in the way footsteps no longer hurried even when there was somewhere to be. The city breathed evenly now, no longer listening for the storm, no longer bracing against it. The air held a quiet balance, cool enough to remind, warm enough to comfort. Shadows softened at the edges of buildings, and the sounds of daily life returned in gentle layers. Distant voices, a cart rolling steadily along stone, the low hum of movement that no longer felt demanding. These sounds blended into a soothing rhythm, familiar and grounding. People rested more easily at night. Sleep came without effort, dreams untroubled by wind or cold. The city, too, seemed to sleep better, its streets lying open and unguarded beneath the sky. Winter was still present, but it had found its place, no longer in control, no longer pressing. In this calm, there was gratitude without words, for warmth, for patience, for the simple continuity of days moving forward. The city did not celebrate loudly, it simply continued, content in its quiet resilience. What remained after the blizzard was not just a city restored, but a city quietly changed. The streets looked familiar again, yet something subtle lingered beneath the surface, an understanding shaped by stillness and cold. Life had resumed its patterns, but with gentler edges, as if the city now moved with an awareness of its own fragility and strength. People carried this feeling with them without naming it, in the way they paused before rushing ahead, in the way they offered help without being asked, in the way they accepted delays with calm rather than frustration. These were small shifts, almost invisible, yet they shaped the rhythm of daily life. Winter would come again, as it always did. Snow would fall, winds would rise, and the city would feel the chill once more. But it would not be the same city that had once been so easily halted. It had learned how to rest, how to endure, and how to move forward slowly when speed was not possible. And so, beneath the passing seasons, the memory of that great stillness remained, quiet, steady, and comforting, like a deep breath taken long ago, still echoing softly in the present. Even as the days lengthened, a faint echo of winter followed the city into ordinary moments. It appeared in pauses, those brief hesitations before stepping outside, before planning too far ahead, before assuming tomorrow would unfold exactly as expected. These pauses were gentle, not fearful, like a quiet check-in with the present moment. Shops reopened fully, and familiar routines returned, yet there was less urgency in the air. People lingered at doorways, exchanged a few extra words, allowed silence to sit comfortably between sentences. The memory of isolation had softened interactions, making closeness feel more valuable, more intentional. At night, when streets emptied and lamps reflected on stone, the city felt reflective rather than restless. The wind, when it passed between buildings, sounded less like a warning and more like a reminder, soft, passing, easily endured. Winter's echo did not demand attention, it simply existed, calm and unobtrusive. In this steady rhythm, life moved forward without forgetting what it had learned. The city carried on, balanced between memory and motion, content to let both guide the way. There were moments now, small, almost invisible, when the city chose to pause, not because it had to, but because it knew the value of stillness. A person might stop mid-walk to watch light slide across a building. A shopkeeper might rest hands on the counter, breathing quietly before the next task. These pauses were brief, yet they carried a depth, learned from long days of waiting. The air felt balanced, neither demanding nor heavy. Sounds arrived softly and left the same way, footsteps echoing just long enough to be noticed before dissolving into the background. The city no longer filled every space with motion. It allowed gaps, moments where nothing needed to happen. In these pauses, there was rest. Not sleep, not escape, but a calm awareness of being present. The blizzard had taught the city that stillness was not emptiness, and that waiting could be its own form of strength. As evening approached, lights came on one by one, unhurried. The city settled into itself, comfortable with quiet, ready to move when needed, content to pause when it was not. A gentle confidence flowed through the city now, almost unnoticed, like warmth returning to cold hands. It showed itself in simple decisions made without doubt, in movements that no longer hesitated or rushed. The city trusted itself again, not in bold declarations, but in quiet certainty. People walked with ease, feeling the ground beneath them without thinking about it. Doors opened smoothly. Conversations began naturally. The tension that once lived beneath every action had dissolved, leaving behind a calm assurance that whatever came next could be met, one steady step at a time. Even the sky seemed to reflect this change. Clouds drifted without urgency, opening and closing around soft light. The air carried a mild coolness, familiar and harmless, no longer something to brace against. Winter had become a companion rather than an opponent. As night settled, the city rested comfortably in this confidence. Lamps glowed steadily. Windows reflected calm interiors. Sleep arrived gently, unforced, carrying with it the sense that the city and those within it were ready for whatever tomorrow chose to bring. Ordinary days returned so quietly that no one could say exactly when they began. There was no clear moment of change, just a gentle realization that life had slipped back into its familiar shape, altered but intact. Morning routines unfolded with ease. Evening rest came naturally. The city moved through its hours without strain. What made these days different was not what happened, but how it happened. People noticed more. They felt the temperature of the air on their skin, the firmness of the ground beneath their feet, the comfort of walls and roofs that had once felt uncertain. Ordinary things carried a quiet gratitude, unspoken, yet deeply felt. The memory of the blizzard rested far enough away to no longer intrude, yet close enough to inform. It shaped patience, softened reactions, and reminded the city that even stillness had its place. Life continued, not hurried, not heavy, just steady and calm. In this gentle return to the everyday, there was peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of understanding. And the city held it carefully, letting ordinary days be enough. Though winter slowly loosened its hold, a trace of it remained woven into the days that followed. It lived quietly beneath ordinary moments, like a season within a season, felt rather than seen. The city carried this layer gently, allowing it to deepen awareness without darkening the mood. Cold mornings still arrived now and then, crisp and clear, reminding people of how far they had come. Breath rose briefly, then vanished. Sunlight followed soon after, softening the edges of the day. These contrasts felt balanced, reassuring, as if the world were settling into harmony again. The city moved with quiet intention. Tasks were done fully, then released. Rest was taken when needed. There was less resistance to change, more acceptance of rhythm. Winter had taught the city how to flow rather than push. As evenings grew longer and lighter, the memory of stillness remained, a calm center the city could return to whenever needed. And in that center, there was rest. By now, the blizzard no longer hovered at the edge of thought. It had settled deeper, becoming part of the city's inner landscape rather than its daily awareness. Like a lesson fully learned, it no longer needed constant recall. It simply shaped responses quietly, guiding choices without announcing itself. The city felt grounded. Streets held warmth a little longer in the afternoon. Stone and brick released the cold they had stored for so many days. People sensed this shift without naming it, responding with relaxed movements and easier breathing. Winter still existed, but it no longer defined the day. There was comfort in this depth of memory. Nothing had been erased. Everything had found its place. The storm was no longer something to look back at. It was something carried forward, calmly, without weight. As evening arrived, the city settled into rest once more, wrapped in familiarity rather than vigilance. Lamps glowed softly, doors closed with quiet certainty. And within the calm rhythm of ordinary life, the memory of endurance rested, steady, warm, and secure. And there was a quiet strength in the city now, so subtle it could almost be missed. It did not announce itself through noise or movement. It lived instead in balance, in knowing when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to remain still. The city carried itself with ease, no longer tense, no longer cautious, but calmly prepared. People sensed this strength in ordinary moments. In the way a sudden cold breeze no longer startled them. In the way an unexpected pause in the day felt acceptable, even welcome. The memory of being stopped completely had softened the fear of delay, replacing it with trust. The city's nights were especially peaceful. Streets lay open beneath the sky, light steady and untroubled. The air moved gently, without urgency. Winter was present only as a faint whisper now, a reminder rather than a force. And within this calm, enduring strength, the city continued, quietly confident, gently awake, ready to rest whenever rest was needed. At some quiet point, the blizzard crossed a threshold and became history. Not a distant tale yet, but something settled, kept carefully, like a photograph tucked into a book. The city no longer measured itself against the storm. It simply carried the knowledge that it had endured. People spoke of those days with a soft clarity now. Details emerged gently, the color of the sky, the sound of wind between buildings. The patients learned shovel by shovel. These memories no longer carried strain. They rested calmly, adding depth to the present rather than pulling it backward. The city moved on without leaving anything behind. Every lesson had found its place. Every pause had taught its value. Winter remained a season, not a threat, and the rhythm of life flowed with renewed trust. There was an ease in the city that felt earned. Streets held movement without tension. Buildings stood quietly, warmed by returning light. Even the air seemed to move more kindly, drifting rather than pressing. People lived fully in these days, not distracted by memory, not anxious about what might come. There was room for rest, room for motion, room for simple enjoyment of being present. The city felt balanced, awake, but unhurried. As evening fell, the world softened naturally. Lamps glowed, footsteps faded. Windows reflected calm interiors. The city prepared for sleep the way it had learned to, gently, with trust. In the end, what remained most vivid was not the cold, nor the snow, nor the silence, but the calm that followed. A calm born of patience, shared effort, and deep rest. The city carried that calm forward, preserving it like warmth held beneath layers. Life continued, seasons turned, and the memory of the great blizzard settled fully into time. Yet, whenever the city paused, when snow fell softly, when streets grew quiet, when the world slowed, it remembered. And in that remembrance it found peace. The city slept easily now, knowing it could endure stillness and return gently to motion. The storm had passed, but its quiet gift remained. Thank you for resting with me through this quiet journey into the past. As you settle into sleep, let the calm of the story stay with you, the patience, the stillness, the steady return of warmth and light. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the night carry you gently onward.